Welcome to Storytime Digital Media. This is Megan Fox, and I'm here with Kevin DuJan, and we are talking today again about the Tinley Park low-income housing project scandal, and we're going to, we've got a lot of stuff to cover today. The chat is open. If you are on this link, you can see there's a group chat on the right. If you have any questions or comments that you wanted to give the board and weren't able to, please do chat them over there, and we will read them or answer your questions. Now, Kevin, we were just talking before the broadcast began about what has the news coverage been like about this incident in Tinley Park?
Well, here's something interesting. So if you are someone who pays attention to media, you should always know that these reporters always have an agenda. And the press in our country is really no different than back in the days of the Soviet Union and the propaganda that was put out. So I think a lot of people want to believe that reporters, will tell the truth or will be unbiased, but that is not the case anymore, because these people learn in journalism school from professors that have a very lefty bent and are very ideologically driven. They really believe in big government. They believe in doing what they can to help the government. So they will always take the side of the government versus the people wherever they can. And reporters are very lazy too, because they like to cover stories only in a certain way. So in an instance like this, where there's a low-income housing project proposed, reporters never want to be the person who is against a low-income housing project anywhere, for any reason. This is one of these sacred cows that they never want to be a bad guy and be against any low-income housing project. And I think that reporters feel that way because they're afraid of their careers, or they'd get in trouble with their editors, or their journalism professor would be mad. This is just one of these things. It would be like, to them, it's like being against fluffy kittens.
Well, it's like when we found the emails back during the Orland Park days between the Orland Prairie editor and the spokesperson of the library, that he said he was only interested in doing positive stories for the library. So he completely ignored the fact that they had covered up child porn and public masturbation, and wanted to write about children's programming.
And sex crimes. There was women being stalked in that library. There were female employees reporting sexual harassment and being told that they should quit their jobs. They didn't like it. But the reporters weren't interested in that. They didn't want to write that story.
And I just did a Google search for the Tinley Park story to see what news organizations have picked it up. And it's absolutely pathetic. There are the two articles in the Chicago Tribune, and like one patch article, and that's Southtown and Us, and that's in Edgar County Watchdogs, and that's it.
And can we just give a shout out to those Edgar County Watchdogs? They are the best community activists. They are the absolute best watchdogs in our entire state, and they are tireless. They cover government corruption all over the place. They are experts on the Freedom of Information Act and the Open Meetings Act. You and I have learned everything that we know about the Open Meetings Act from the Edgar County Watchdogs. And at that last board meeting, when that attorney, Thomas Melody from Kleinthorpe Jenkins, tried to not have public comment, he tried to censor and silence the public and not let the public speak, it's because of what the Edgar County Watchdogs taught us, that every public meeting has to have public comment. So that's why Kleinthorpe Jenkins was defeated. And this is the law firm that wherever they go, whatever public body they represent, they try to advise the public bodies to not listen to the public, to silence the public. And it's the work of the Edgar County Watchdogs that really helped expose that. But going back to what the reporters want to do and the narrative that they want to tell, they always want to present these stories about a low-income housing project, about the community being terrible for not wanting this, and that wherever this would be built, this should be built. But the issue here, and this is what's interesting, they can't write the stories they want to write about this, and that's why they're not writing anything. And the reason they can't write the story they want to write, and the reason that they're not writing about this, they're not writing about thousands of people coming out in the cold of February to attend.
I know, it's like the biggest story all year in the southwest suburbs, and it's incredible that the news cameras were not there. It's
and the reason they don't want to write the story is because they would have to write about the corruption. They'd have to write about these shady dealings. They'd have to write about some of the interesting stuff that came out at Thursday's meeting that I think was explosive and mind-blowing.
Well, I think the most explosive thing was how many people mobilized in a matter of 72 hours. There were 3,000 people organized to descend on the village, and, you know, with pitchforks and torches. But no, I mean, but seriously, that was the big story to me. And, you know, they're always reporting about these protests where they say that there's, you know, all these thousands of people, and it's like 30 people on a sidewalk, but they put the camera real close to them, so it looks like they're, you know, there's a ton of people. And if it's something that they agree with, they'll go down for any protest. But this protest was absolutely gigantic. EMS had to be called out to help control traffic, had to find extra parking. There was overflow rooms. It had to be put on television for the first time. There were people standing room only, and there wasn't one camera besides ours to catch it.
Well, Megan, the reason for that is that reporters only want to report on a story like this if people are ranting and raving and screaming and yelling and acting crazy. That's what they want to report on. But in Tinley Park, these people in Tinley Park are amazing. They are so articulate. They have all of their facts. They do all of their research. They very calmly speak to this board, and they deliver just what I think is explosive bombshells, but in a rational, controlled, professional way. There was this wonderful man named Steve Eberhardt, and remember him from Thursday. And he really did his homework, and he really dropped some bombshells. And he's the one that revealed that that Buckeye Development Company, they submitted paperwork to the state of Illinois that IDA, that Illinois Department Housing Authority, that they were not going to have commercial space in this housing project. And that's really important that that paperwork was submitted, because at the time that plot of land was zoned to be the first floor commercial with the residential above it. Then Steve Eberhardt also revealed that Amy Connolly had written a letter that she was not supposed to write, because a letter of support was supposed to come from either the mayor or from the zoning administrator. But Tinley Park doesn't have a zoning administrator, so the rule said it would either be zoning administrator or it would be the chief elected official, which would be the mayor. But Amy Connolly doesn't qualify as either of those two things, so she submitted a letter in support of this project when she shouldn't have. And then IDA went and approved this based on, you know, her letter, and based on the fact that he was saying there'd be no commercial on this. But that's where the issue with the zoning comes in, that the zoning then had to be changed to allow this to go through. There's clear evidence there of some underhandedness and some shady dealings there, and that's why the calls have been made for that independent investigator to come in. But it was just so explosive and so revealing, and just so, it was just boom, boom, boom after another. One fact dropped on there.
The people of Tinley Park are really impressive people, because one after the other, you know, they came down and just stood up to them so well. I felt like any person who spoke in front of that board, pretty much 90% of them would make excellent board members themselves. You know, it was incredible. It was like, well, that guy could be better on the board, and that guy could be better on the board, and that woman would be better on the board. I mean, they really impressed me. I've been to other communities before where people get up to speak and they seem very intimidated by the board, and they feel like they have to kowtow to them and thank them for allowing them to speak.
And here's a couple other things that's interesting about that. You know, first of all, there's two board members that are shameful, and they're nowhere near as bad as some of the board members that you and I have observed at different places. But come on, you know, Bernie Brady and TJ Grady, Brady and Grady, you're slumping in your chairs like you're on a, you know,
you're
a jumbo jet.
You're telling the public that you resent them. Don't do that.
Don't do that.
Don't do that.
But, you know, but their behavior compared to what we've seen other places is really nothing. But they were disrespectful.
Well, when you compare their behavior to an elected trustee giving you the finger, It
Right.
really isn't comparable.
It really isn't comparable, but what I do want to say though is I'm very impressed with the way that the Village of Tinley Park saw that they had a problem and they realized that they couldn't be hostile to the public. And the mayor, I believe that the mayor was snippy with some people and was sending some not too professional emails at first, but someone seems to have taken him aside and told him to knock that off. Now apparently when people write to the mayor writes back, especially about that Amy Connolly, because just about everybody who has heard anything about this wants that Amy Connolly fired. I'm sure people would love to see her tarred and feathered, but that's not going to happen. But people ask for her to be fired, and the mayor will write back politely. People are posting screen grabs of what the mayor is sending on that Citizens of Tinley Park Facebook group, and the mayor is saying, well, this is a personnel issue that we cannot speak about, but we are strenuously investigating this, or we are taking this very seriously, stay tuned, that kind of thing. And that's a great difference from the kind of combative tone that he tried taking in the first couple days, and that blew up in his face and he learned. And so on Thursday, Megan, we saw the mayor come out and say that an investigation is going to be conducted and he's going to appoint this citizen oversight committee. And then
my favorite part was when the crowd was like, appoint them now, and he had to come back out and do it right away.
Right, he came, but he was smart enough to come right out and do that. And if people don't just naturally pick up on that, that is so different than how Illinois typically operates, where you would expect a mayor to just hate the public. Like, could you imagine Rahm Emanuel coming out and trying to make nice and trying to solve things? That's not their instinct here in Chicago. They aren't like that. The reason I think that he had to do that and had to take such steps was because the people of Tinley Park are just awesome. There's no other way to put that.
No, they really are.
That American spirit, like it is so great to see. It's back to the days of the founding fathers of, what is that Thomas Jefferson quote that you like?
Well, when the government fears the people, there is liberty. And when the people fear their government, there is tyranny. So, it's frankly, Tinley Park has shown the way of how to do this in a community, of how to really put the fear of God into your village if they are doing things that are against the will of the people. What they have done, and nobody shouted or screamed. Well, the crowd kind of screamed together, but it was all very good-natured, but they showed a righteous anger, and they did not allow their rights to be violated. They did not allow them to be silenced. It was a beautiful thing to behold, and I was thrilled, and I've never been prouder to be an American in my life.
And that Matt Coughlin, he had a quote. He said, in the arena, that was from the first meeting, the February 2nd meeting, talking about citizens coming into the arena and doing their duty and overseeing government. And that's all part of the First Amendment right to petition. That's something that Kleinthorpe Jenkins firm, you and I have been studying them for 2 years. They go around to all these communities in Illinois and they very actively try to silence the public. They try to do things to remove public comment. Megan, you and I stopped that Thomas Melody. He was trying to say that public comment didn't have to happen at Thursday's meeting of the Planning Commission, but in Illinois, every public meeting has to have public comment. Thomas Melody knows that. He went to law school.
Their law firm wrote the book on it.
Yeah, there's a book called The Sunshine Laws. It was written by various attorneys at Kleinthorpe Jenkins. And so it's very ironic that this firm that wrote this book, and they like to, they have these conferences all around town where people are charged a lot of money to attend, and they talk to different public employees. So public bodies have to pay money to go to these conferences. And Kleinthorpe Jenkins sends lawyers that give bad advice to public employees and tell them ways that they could silence the public and keep people from speaking at meetings. They do things to intimidate people too. The one thing I didn't like that Tinley Park did is they had 3 police officers in that main meeting room standing around, and they had a village employee going up to people with a police officer standing right next to her, making people write down their names, write down their addresses. That is not provided under the Open Meetings Act. You cannot intimidate people. And this is, some people who spoke said, we don't mind giving our address, but really that's a constitutional civil rights violation, because
well, right, it's not about whether you mind or not, and if you don't mind, then you give it, of course. But it's that the public needs to be told that they are not required to give their name or address when speaking before a public body, because the Attorney General has ruled that it is a form of intimidation, because some of these municipalities and villages or whatever will retaliate.
Oh, they'll totally retaliate. And here's the thing. So what the fear is that when a public body does this and they have the police standing there, so people feel afraid of saying, no, I don't want to give you my address, or no, I don't want to give you my name. Someone has an unpopular opinion and they want to come before a public body and express it, but they're afraid of retaliation by the public body. That, and Orland Park is very much a community that does things like that people are afraid to speak out because they're afraid of the police there. They're afraid of Chief McCarthy in Orland Park. They're afraid of what the Orland Park village officials will do. They're afraid of losing their job, or they're afraid of their husband or cousin who works for the village losing their job because they've spoken out.
We heard that all over town. We had people I had people coming up to me at the grocery store on a pretty regular basis saying, oh, I really wanted to go to that meeting and speak out, but my husband works for the village and I was really afraid he would get fired, or so-and-so just got a contract with the village for a construction job, and you know how they are, and he'll lose it. So now, but what's interesting is that Tinley Park people do not seem to be afraid of their government at all. And I think that just shows that Tinley Park is a wonderful place to live.
And let's just talk about
the get better neighbors.
Let's just talk about the Tinley Park police officers and how different they were from Orland Park. Now, in Orland Park, the police officers, when they come to a meeting, they really are there to bully and intimidate the public, in my opinion. That's how they come across.
That's been our experience, yes.
But in Tinley Park, the cops, they had 3 cops in that meeting room, the commission meeting room, but their demeanor was very different, wasn't it?
Oh, I absolutely agree. I felt like they were just, I felt like they were citizens like everybody else who were standing there listening and just being there. I mean, we knew they had to be there for emergency management services and, of course, to help with crowd control, but they didn't seem to be looking for people to stop. Like at Orland, for instance, when you're in a village meeting, if anyone were to have spoken out of turn, well, me specifically, but when people would try and speak up and say, hey, you're breaking the law or whatever, they would immediately want to run and call the police to have you arrested. It seemed like in Tinley, not even the police officers who were in the room already, they didn't make a move when people were speaking out of turn. They just let the village board handle it. And the people were not out of control, even though occasionally they spoke out of turn. No one was out of control. And an interruption in a public meeting is not against the law. It is not against the law to interrupt these people on the board. They're not kings.
And, Orland Park is a place where it really is a police state, where the police through fear. So they use fear and they use intimidation and bullying. Tinley Park isn't like that. And I think the government in Tinley Park really respects and fears the public, and the public coming out and the public speaking. Because even when Kleinthorpe Jenkins was encouraging them to break the Open Meetings Act and was sitting there, those 2 times that Thomas Melody was doing that, was caught, he had to back down right away. And the commissioners and the board members and the trustees and everyone there, they all backed down.
Yeah, they didn't fight that at all. And did you notice, this was also another something that I noticed that made me really feel like Tinley Park has a really tight-knit community, was that so many of the people who came to spoke had personal relationships with people on the board, and you could tell the mutual respect and affection they had for one another, even though they were on opposing sides. Like the former trustee who was cracking jokes, and Ed Machuzik cracking jokes with the chairman, and at the same time delivering a really strong rebuke of what is happening. And it was like, to me, it was a really strong indicator that this is a community that really cares about one another. The citizens who are angry, they still care about those members on the board. They know their neighbors, they know one another, but they're not going to let this nonsense go. And I just
really want to talk about that.
How everybody just seemed like they really appreciated one another, even though they were having a problem.
They did, and the other thing that really is memorable and unique for Illinois is that Jake Vandenberg, you know, I know some people were concerned about him because he's the trustee that was over the planning commission, and some people have trouble believing that he didn't know what was going on. After hearing him on Thursday, when he delivered a barn burner of a speech, that's the kind of thing that you learn about in civics class, you know, people doing here and there. That was a Mr. Smith Goes to Washington kind of speech, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That he really stood up there and he said, you know, what's going on here? We need to get the bottom of this. That's also totally different than in Orland Park. When Orland Park, they would just cover things up and they would try to hide things from the public or refuse to listen. This trustee Vandenberg got up and said, we need to bring people in to look at what's been happening here. What are our public employees doing? That's so different.
For a moment, Kevin, I want you to imagine for a moment that the first time we ever went before the Orland Park Library Board, when we showed them the reports that said, your own library reports say that someone accessed child porn here. It was witnessed by 3 people, including a child, and staff willfully chose not to call police and even allowed him back in the library, and the man admitted he did it. When we presented that information, wouldn't it have been amazing if at the next meeting, one of the board members stood up and said, I am calling for an independent investigation of this. This will never happen again in my library as long as I live. But did that happen?
No, it did not happen. And instead, the board clamped up.
For 2 years.
They listened to Kleinthorpe Jenkins, and they actually even had a lawyer named James Fessler from Kleinthorpe Jenkins. He came out and he attacked us for blowing the whistle on this, for finding this out. He made threats to us. He broke the Open Meetings Act multiple times. And they consistently did that, where they had to end up being sued because they refused to stop breaking the law. They refused to stop hiding documents. They were redacting, you know, every word on a document like they were the CIA. And that's all against the law. They were holding illegal secret meetings on days they weren't allowed to hold meetings. You know, the board members were buying each other gold jewelry from Norrell Diamond Jewelers with taxpayer money. So this is all stuff that had been going on, and they didn't have anyone like a Jake Vandenberg.
No, they did not have a Jake Vandenberg to stand up and say, I'm not having any more of this. We're going to have an independent investigator. And it's incredible to me, the difference, because I really truly started to believe that America, as I knew it, was gone. And I want to tell you, because nobody seemed to be doing the right thing over there, and it's still a mess. When Tinley Park stood up to this, and those good trustees stood up to this, it restored my faith in this country. I'm telling you, it's a big deal. It is a big deal.
It is a big deal. And the caveat I will add to that is that Tinley Park still employs Kleinthorpe Jenkins as its attorneys.
Right.
So there still is problems. And we saw that with Thomas Melody. So if the public doesn't know its rights and doesn't know it can stand up to Thomas Melody and Kleinthorpe Jenkins and tell them that they are, you know, breaking the law and stop.
Let's talk about that for a minute.
But wait, let me finish.
Oh, sorry.
Thomas Melody and Kleinthorpe Jenkins also is advising them to play games with FOIA production. So we're already seeing that. So FOIA requests have been made for different documents pertaining to Amy Connolly and to all of these shenanigans that have been going on, but those have not been produced yet. So we're approaching the deadline for production. It looks like they're going to be non-compliant. So hopefully Trustee Vandenberg and the other good trustees will say to their FOIA officer that they need to produce these documents to the public. And that's the point I wanted to get across, that hopefully Tinley Park will be smart enough not to listen to bad legal advice the way that Orland Park does, because Tinley Park should not have to be sued to get these documents. So let's just hope and pray, Megan, that they do the right thing and they release the documents that they are so far refusing to release.
Arthur Pierce, who is the guy at the head of the table in front of Jake Vandenberg in that picture, is the FOIA officer. And he has filed for extensions. They have an extension they can put in that is a legal thing they can do, although I think it was worthless. I don't think there was any reason to do it. But if you remember, someone already came before the board, that Ed, you had his last name a minute ago, and the same one who talked about the documents. He has had many FOIA problems with the village. He claims they take 15 to 20 days to return anything every time, which is against the law. That is they need to get better at that. But I did want to make the point about Kleinthorpe Jenkins and Thomas Melody. You know, it upsets me that any member of the public should have to tell a practicing attorney who wrote the book on the Sunshine Laws and what that means, which is, you know, that the public has a right to speak. It upsets me that any member of the public has to interrupt an attorney and tell him what the law is. He knows what the law is. So he is willfully misleading the public and trying to get them to shut up because it would be easier for his client or whatever, but it's not legal. So it is shameful to me that this is happening with where people in the public have to fight for their right to speak when they should be offered it. It should be offered to them immediately at every public meeting. Whenever you are having your public comment time, the proper thing to do is not to look to your attorney. The proper thing to do is to say, all right, people, it's now time for public comment. We have public comment rules. You have 3 minutes or 5 minutes to deliver your comments. Please come forward one at a time and form a line. And that's all you can say. You cannot say, like Kleinthorpe Jenkins attorneys told the Orland Park Library, that they could control the content of our speech. We were told, oh, we're not talking about that anymore. So unless you have any new material, like I'm some kind of comedian, you may not speak anymore. That is illegal. And telling people, well, we've tabled this issue, so it's taken care of, and so you don't need to speak. That is illegal.
That is illegal, and people need to start asking the question of why village money, taxpayer money, and a whole lot of it, because Kleinthorpe Jenkins bills $200 an hour to have that Thomas Melody sitting there during those meetings. And then Thomas Melody is trying to tell the public that they can't speak, or he suggests that there's no public comment this evening because they've tabled something. That is very inappropriate. So he should get one warning. If he ever does that again, that's strike 2. Strike 3, they should get rid of Kleinthorpe Jenkins. Because why are you paying taxpayer money to a law firm that is advising a public body to do things that harm the public, try to censor the public, silence the public? That's just inappropriate. But I want to commend the Village of Tinley Park for not only having the conference room or the meeting room, whatever they call that hearing room, but they set up a satellite room that had capacity for a lot of people. But there were still people having to be out in hallways. Some people even couldn't be in the building. There were so many people that wanted to attend. But Tinley Park, I think, did a great job of trying to have as many people as possible. However, I do want to note that some people were turned away and weren't able to come into the meeting, and the ones who were in that overflow room, a lot of them couldn't hear very well. So I believe that that is a violation of the Open Meetings Act, and that they had this meeting and everyone who attended could not be present, could not hear, could not see what was going on. So I do hope in the future that Tinley Park, when they have knowledge, and they had clear knowledge that this would be incredibly well attended, why wasn't this meeting held at the gym auditorium or someplace like that, Megan? Isn't there a convention center in Tinley Park that they could have had this big meeting?
Well, they certainly could have gone to any of the high schools, and I do think that would have been smarter. Although I think what happened, and I don't think it'll happen again, I think what happened was they had the technology to do this live streaming thing, and they thought that it was going to work. And I think they had some technical difficulties. And I don't think that'll happen again. I think they're going to work hard to fix that, because what I've seen from this village, they really do care that the citizens are heard and can hear them. So I don't think it was intentional. I think it was just one of those things. And I think that I think they're making great efforts to include people and be more communicative with them, because that's what the people have asked for. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say they did all they could. I think they knew it was going to be well attended. I don't think they knew how well attended, because it broke all the records. They've never had this many people show up at a board meeting before.
Now, I want to talk about someone who showed up to the meeting, but she didn't open her mouth very much, to the point where people had to ask if she had fallen mute. That was that Amy Connolly, the planning director. So I feel like she was told, possibly by Clanthorpe Jenkins again, to clam up, to lawyer up, to not say anything. And what I liked most were all the people who weren't going to let her off the hook, were asking her direct questions, asking her why she did things that she did. Like that Steve Eberhard asked her directly, why did you submit this letter? You weren't authorized to submit a letter of support for this Buckeye project. Why were you doing that? And he was asking the board, why are you allowing these village employees to do that? There was a former village trustee, very well-respected man who seemed to be a very popular village trustee. All the trustees knew him. All the people on the planning commission knew him. I think his name is Ed Matuzek.
Matuzek, yeah.
And he came forward and he said, there is a problem here where these village employees are not being supervised. And you said the other day that this Amy, she needs to be supervised.
Well, listen, this isn't the first time she's caused a ruckus. You know, she was involved in the cell tower debacle too. And back then, the people upset about that had identified her as being part of the problem. And so now this is the second time that we know of that she's, you know, Amy gone wild on something. And, you know, I think after the first time, they should have known she needed some supervision. Now here we have this second time. I personally believe she needs more than supervision. I think this job is not for her. But
I also think that she didn't really seem to take a lot of this too seriously. Before the meeting, she was, you know, prancing around, wiggling her butt, laughing, giggling. You know, seemed really strange to me because she realized that there were thousands of people who were angry about this, and over 1,000 showed up in person on a cold night, having to get babysitters or rush home from work or go in late for work or miss work to be there in the evening if they work second shifts. I don't think that she had the attitude of contrition that she should have had.
no, and I expected her to have like a prepared statement or something, like that she would have been advised to address this, especially because at the village board meeting, and here's the crux of it that I think made people angry. At the village board meeting, the mayor and everybody else kept saying, we have no control over this. And then the people asked him directly, well, who does? Remember that? What can you do, Mayor? Who does? And he said, and so did the other board members, the planning commission, you have to go there for your answers. Well, so all these people came out for their answers, and did they get any? No. They, you know, all the questions, whenever they asked the questions about Amy Connolly during the village board meeting, they were told, you need to go talk to the planning commission. So they go talk to the planning commission, and nobody will talk about Amy Connolly at all.
Right, it was a pass the buck moment, and that man, whoever he was, who was in charge of the planning commission, the chairman, was his name Pierce?
Arthur Pierce.
Arthur Pierce. He's also the FOIA production officer for the Village of Tinley Park. But he passed the buck repeatedly and said, well, that's not what this commission does, or we can't make her answer questions or any of that stuff. So there was a whole lot of passing the buck, where you would go to the village board meeting and they say, well, we can't answer it. Go to the planning commission.
Well, we can't.
Go to the planning commission, and they say, well, we can't answer it either. But they didn't say who would or who could. So basically, they made this impression that nobody's running anything in the village.
Right. And, you know, I think that here's an interesting, my favorite part, probably one of the most, you know, shocking moments that I found really in just like bad management was when the village manager, he said he was being questioned because he was the only one who would answer questions when they were directed about Amy Connolly, but he wouldn't answer them really, but he was the only one talking. So one of the members of the public said to him, you know, this construction firm that Buckeye is using has a lot of bad deals in Chicago and was looked at for fraud. And he said, you know, didn't you look into this group before you've decided to give them a permit to build here? And do you remember what the village manager said?
What'd he say?
He said, I can't, he said, I don't have the authority to do that. And the guy goes, you don't have Google? And that was so funny to me, because this is such a great example of government, inefficiency. You don't have the authority to look into, you don't have the authority to get online and go to the Googles on the internets and type up this construction company to make sure they're not being sued and there's not a bunch of bad ratings on, just check the Better Business Bureau, for crying out loud. Really? No one checked into the construction company at all?
And that construction company is really interesting, because on that Friends, or the Citizens of Tinley Park group, that construction company, which is now called Tower Construction Company, but there used to be a construction company called Castle Construction Company that was located in the exact same address, exact same building that Tower Construction Company is now. The father used to own Castle Construction Company. Now the son owns Tower. So Tower is a splint off or a spin off of Castle, clearly. That Tower Construction Company guy was on that Facebook page a couple days ago, making slap threats, strategic litigation against public participation, trying to scare people from saying anything negative about Tower Construction and their involvement in this housing project, and scare them that, if they criticize Tower, that would be defamatory. And, the implication was there that a lawsuit would be filed against anyone. A slap lawsuit is something that is filed to silence your First Amendment rights. It is filed by typically public entities or some business doing work with a public entity. A lot of times this is about real estate development, where the developer or the construction company will file a slap lawsuit, claim that they've been defamed by people criticizing them. And that's really just to shut people up so they can do whatever they want to do and do their project without criticism. But this Tower Construction Company is a remnant of that castle that was involved in all kind of illegal things. Didn't somebody go to jail for castle construction?
I think his father did, if I'm not mistaken. I haven't read up too much on it, but I know that he was charged by the Attorney General. So I don't know how it came.
This idiot son goes on Facebook, slapping out those threats, and it looks like someone took him to the side and said, stop that and shut up. Because very quickly, when he was called out on it and called out on making that slap threat, then he backed away and he said, "Oh, duly noted," and stopped.
Well, yeah, and I think what people need to understand about a slap lawsuit is that when people file these, they come up with everything they can think of to throw at you in the kitchen sink, and they find a disreputable lawyer who will file it, who doesn't, care that it's illegal. They'll just take the money. And they don't expect to win. They expect to scare you into settlement, because you have to defend yourself. When someone sues you, you must defend yourself. You can't just say to go to the judge and be like, hey, I didn't do any of this, and they're trying to shut me up, and that's what this is about. It has to go through all these motions, and you have to have a lawyer, and this is a process that takes a really long time. So the filing itself is the punishment. They don't plan on winning. It is simply to harass and silence and scare people away.
Yeah, and to cost you money, you have to hire attorneys to defend yourself. You have to go through all the time of getting everything ready for discovery and all that. But what happens in a lot of these slap lawsuits is the slapper is either a proxy for a public body, so they have indemnification, when they're countersued, or they also are getting funds somehow from either the public body or from some third-party group, to fund the slap lawsuit, or they're, a rich individual, or they're a company like Tower Construction or whatever. And so they have the resources just to file this lawsuit and pay an attorney or retainer, to do the harassment of the person you want to silence. And the community activist that is speaking out against whatever horrible thing the government body is doing, they don't have money to pay for attorneys. So the whole goal is just to scare the person, shut them up, also make other people afraid to speak out too, because they'll say, oh, so-and-so got sued for speaking out about whatever. I don't want to be sued, so I'm not going to go to the meeting. I'm not going to speak out because I'm afraid.
Right.
That's the point of this.
That is the point of it, yes. And I also want to point out about, you mentioned indemnification. I want to talk about that in regards to Amy Connolly, because this is something that the citizens of Tinley Park ought to be on the lookout for. If it comes out in an investigation that Amy Connolly is liable for any of this damage, and if a lawsuit is brought against her, be careful that the village doesn't take a vote to indemnify her, which means cover her under their insurance policy, so that any legal defense that she gets will be paid for by the people of Tinley Park. And Tinley Park, I don't think, wants to pay for Amy Connolly's legal defense. Do you?
No, I don't think so, but you need to be really careful about that, because very well she could end up sticking taxpayers with her legal defense, or having Kleinthorpe Jenkins represent her. This is what happens because the village will have an insurance policy, and then if Amy puts in a claim to be indemnified under the insurance policy, because she'll claim that anything she did that she's being accused of in terms of wrongdoing, she did in the course of her duties as a public official, she very well could try to have taxpayers pay for her attorney to defend her, because all of these public entities have passed all of these resolutions and all of these codes that
There's a law in Illinois that says they're immune.
Well, in a lot of cases, that's what it says, that they're immune, and because they're a public official. And so here's where the crux ends up being, is that if she's involved in wrongdoing for personal gain, I wonder if that indemnification gets taken away. It's pretty hard to imagine that if she did something that harmed the community, that then the community would have to pay for her defense.
Well, I've spoken to a lot of attorneys about this very issue, and I have been told that judges in Illinois they very rarely rule against the immunity for public officials in Illinois. And I'm sure that does not surprise anyone. But it does seem that if a public official breaks the law, they will not be held accountable for it. But if you do, watch out, because they're going to get you.
And the stuff that she's doing, it really seems blatant. Like that Steve Eberhard, he did a great job of putting together a rough timeline of facts on this, where that Buckeye Development Company, led by that David Petroni, he submitted paperwork to that Illinois Department of Housing Authority saying that there would be no commercial development at that lot, the reserve lot for that gateway district that they wanted to build, saying that there wouldn't be any commercial. But then Amy's writing a letter saying other things, and then there's the issue of suddenly that verbiage that's in the code has to be changed, because they realized that the documents were already submitted to the state saying there would be no commercial. So now they have to change the zoning from requiring commercial, to just preferring commercial. So putting that one word change from the word required to preferred would have enough wiggle room, they thought, to be able to let Buckeye do what they wanted to do. All of this seemed to be people trying to cover their tracks or cover their backsides. And what's interesting to me is the whole issue of Amy claiming that she had copied Vandenberg on that. And that's why a lot of people were upset with him, wondering, did he really know about what was going on? He said he didn't. Amy was saying that he did know. And then it turns out that, what was it, Megan? Vandenberg had the IT guy check and see if Amy really had emailed him.
Right, and there's no evidence of that. And so if there's no evidence on the server of an email being sent, I can assure you it was not sent. And she typed that CC onto the paper, printed it out, gave it to the Illinois Housing Authority, and never copied her boss. So
it's pretty easy, I think, to fake an email too. You can just fake it and then print it out. You can make it up in a Word document to make it look like an email. I don't know if that is what happened, because I have not seen that document. But I have seen other instances where people have, when they needed to have a document exist, they just fake it and they backdate it. The Orland Park Public Library did that once when we caught them on something. And then they created some fake documents and they backdated them.
It was like a Dan Rather scandal. It was pretty funny.
Right, and once they got caught in that, they backed off on that and never wanted to talk about those documents ever again. But public employees do this when they get caught and they feel like, oh shit, people have figured out what I've done. They then decide to try and cover their tracks on that, and they start faking documents and doing crazy stuff, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, it's strange that this has come up twice now, don't you think?
I think it's very strange.
I think it shows a pattern of when public employees want to get away with something. It seems, do they all go to the same forgery school? I'm confused.
Now, this is interesting you brought this up, because a very nice person who was at that meeting on Thursday, we were talking before the doors were opened, and this is someone who lives in the area a very long time, and this person said, you have to understand that Amy's probably just doing what she was taught, that this goes back generations. This goes back 40 or 50 years of corruption, that this is how things are done. And then when someone's the planning director and they do things for a certain amount of time, and if they get caught in something, they fake documents or they lie or they do all this underhanded stuff. Then when they're ready to retire, they train the new person. And Megan, guess what they teach the new person to do? All the things that they always did.
Right.
And they say, well, this is what the job entails. This is how we do things. When that person retires, then they train the next person and the next person. And so it looks like it finally got to, Amy's the person in that position, and she's just doing the things that she was always taught to do.
Well,
from her perspective, she might see it. This is just speculative. I don't know what she's thinking. I've never spoken to her. I can't say for sure. My bet is that she just said, oh, well, there's a vacant lot there. Clearly, we're never going to get that legacy thing that we wanted. We're never going to have the upscale thing that we wanted to do, so that's not going to work. But I want to look good as the planning director, and I want to say that we built something. So here this company wants to build a $16 million project. I don't care if it's low-income housing. And, Megan, Amy might be very far to the left politically, that she may be like the reporters who see any kind of low-income housing as a positive thing, as a good thing. So she might not understand.
Didn't it concern you that that no one on that planning commission did any financial study of what this would do to the tax base?
No, because I think they just were so enchanted with the idea of something is being built there. Because apparently for 10 years, people have been wanting this to happen and talking about it.
That is just incompetence. That's all that is. That is incompetence.
Megan, I think the other thing they may have rushed this through or wanted to slide this through is they may be embarrassed about that roundabout, how the roundabout then failed because it was a poorly conceived idea to begin with, and it wasn't drawn up properly, or it wouldn't work. A roundabout's a little hard for people who aren't engineers or architects or urban planners to understand, but that is not a place to put it right at that intersection of, what is it, Oak Park and 183?
Yep.
That is not where a roundabout would go. That is not how they use them in Europe. They wouldn't use it in a position like that. So if they built that there, it would cause great backups on all the different parts of the road. It would be a huge nightmare.
Yeah, and how about when the former trustee said, frankly, I don't think I want your staff doing traffic studies. I don't even want the police doing traffic studies. I don't think they're qualified.
She's not qualified. She has a degree.
When did she get qualified to do traffic studies?
Megan, she has a degree in political science, I believe, from I think a college in South Carolina.
And I also like that he brought up, how are you qualified to give legal advice? Are you a lawyer?
Right, and that was about her giving advice on what is commercial versus what is non-commercial.
Right.
And she's not qualified to determine that.
No, and not at all. And and it's amazing to me that I have this feeling, that Thomas Melody knows more than we know, because he had to have been involved in this. He had to have seen paperwork, right? He had to.
We have seen repeatedly where Kleinthorpe Jenkins knows that public bodies, public officials are breaking the law or about to break the law, and they don't stop them. We saw that repeatedly with the Orland Park Public Library, where Dennis Walsh, another Kleinthorpe Jenkins attorney, he knew in advance that an illegal meeting was going to be held. On a day that a meeting couldn't be held, illegal votes were going to be taken. He did nothing to stop it. And you found out at the last minute that that illegal meeting was happening. You went there. You tried to stop it. You told them they were breaking the law. And Dennis Walsh basically laughed at you and said that he knew the law and you didn't. Well, we went to the Attorney General of Illinois with that. The Attorney General of Illinois sided with us. They voided that meeting. They voided all of those votes. And Dennis Walsh just happens to be one of the authors of that Sunshine Laws book. So in the book, he contradicted himself. In the book, he said a meeting could not be held on a state holiday. And that's exactly what they did to try to ram through a bunch of stuff they should have never passed. So my point is that Kleinthorpe Jenkins is a law firm that we have already seen. They look the other way when public officials are about to violate one of the laws.
Or actively help them do it.
Yeah, and if they're violating the Open Meetings Act or the Freedom of Information Act, what other laws do they feel they can let public officials violate?
Right. Yeah, it's offensive. The way they operate is offensive.
We need to cover one other thing too. You said offensive. And so this is related to fences. So
yes,
offensive fences.
Offensive fences. No offense for you. Speaking of, you were just saying that Amy possibly is doing the things that she does because it's always been done that way. Well, the woman who spoke about the fence problem that she had,
she was terrific. Her name was Monica Rubin.
Yes, Monica Rubin.
She was a great speaker.
She was great. And she's that when she talked about that, her fence was old, right? And it fell down during a storm. And all she wanted to do was put up a beautiful new fence in the exact same place where it was. Come to find out that years and years and years ago, before she moved into the house, whoever owned it before somehow got around the code to build the fence. So they didn't have the proper permit to do it, or they got a permit despite the code or whatever it was. And so there was some shenanigans with that person. So somebody knew somebody like Amy Connolly and greased the wheels and got him the permit he wanted. But when she went to go replace the fence, she was told, oh, no, you need a variance, and then there's all this other stuff, and then we're going to deny you, and then it's going to take this much longer, and you have to cost this much more. I mean, her story is incredible, but it just goes to show that, it's just not the same code for everyone. That is not fair. If you're going to have rules in the village, the rules must apply to everyone. And so if a citizen of Tinley Park can't even build a fence, how does a company from Ohio come in and within a few short months have a $16.5 million project going in with no board oversight, with no planning commission oversight, really, because that's what we're finding out. No planning commission oversight, no traffic study, no budgetary study, no tax revenue study. Nothing was done to see if this was going to be good for the community.
Oh, and Megan, this has been happening to other people. Monica Rubin, she brought it up that it happened to her, and this just happened like a week ago. And I think she has a hearing coming up in February, about her fence. But I looked it up on Google, and I found that this has been happening to people for years. There was an article in the paper from 2013 about a young man that had a home, and he wanted to put up a fence so that he could have his puppy out in the front yard. And the way that the planning commission went after him and wouldn't let him put up a fence, even though all his neighbors had fences, but his yard wasn't fenced, the way that they were going to do him, they'd make him cut off like 40% of his property. And that was the same thing they were going to try to do to Monica Rubin too. So this planning commission, Amy was quoted in that article. And Amy was saying, well, we have to do this to this person, and we have to go by what the code said or whatever. It is completely different than everything she seems to have done underhandedly to change the code to let this low-income housing project slip in. I think, number one, because she may be a bleeding heart that she just never will oppose anything called a low-income housing project. Number two, nobody knows if there was something that was given to her to make her want to do that. We don't know. I'm not saying that happened, but I'm saying that nobody knows. But it sure is suspicious that she is such a hard nose when it comes to somebody who wants to build a little fence so their puppy can play outside in the front yard. Won't let that happen. But boy, is she faking documents, and she's writing letters she's not authorized to write, and doing all this underhanded stuff, apparently, to make this deal with Buckeye happen. And it's just so interesting. It's a tale of two processes. If you are an underhanded, shady slimeball company from out of state, you are treated with all this deference, and Amy's doing shenanigans on your behalf. But if you are a Tinley Park homeowner that just wants to put up a fence to improve your property value and to make your home as nice as it can be, she will try to stop you.
It's really, it's not funny. It's just that it's, again, more of this government craziness where this kind of stuff and bureaucracy gets in the way. And, the mayor said something at the when he was trying to calm down the angry mob, and he said, these processes were put in place to take some of the government interference out of the way. And it was like, oh, I wanted to hold my head. You don't take away all oversight. That's not what we mean when we say we want the government to get out of the way. It means that you improve and streamline your processes. You make it easy for people to open businesses, not difficult, but you don't take away oversight, and you don't take away your vote. For crying out loud.
And especially, Megan, I have a picture of this David Petroni up. This man is disgusting. Let's call a spade a spade. He is so disgusting. Somebody said that he reminds them of that Eugene Levy from the American Pie movies. And
he does. He looks exactly like him, separated at birth.
Eugene Levy, he plays a lot of slimeball characters, and this guy is a slimeball. And he comes to that meeting on February 2nd, and he was arguing with Tinley Park residents, like this very nice woman here. She had asked him, she says, why do we need to bend over backwards to let you come in with this project? What are you doing for me? What are you doing for my neighbors? And he just wanted to argue and tell lies. He told lies, and he said that they were going to have a commercial space in this housing project after all. And he was saying that his rental office and the coin-operated laundry facility that would be on the first floor, for residents to wash their clothes, he was calling that commercial. So this is because of that change